For over 20 years, the Fire Store has equipped first responders with the best in firefighting gear. Discover seasonal savings on the gear you trust and visit thefirestore.com to shop everything but the truck.
Hello, John Murphy here. Retired Deputy Fire Chief, Attorney at Law, and doing a program as a reminder to our audience of fire and EMS providers about how to create a legally safe fire department. And today on this presentation, I'm flying solo as my other compadres are off doing important things in the fire law arena. And especially my cohort, Chip Comstock from Ohio, is running for a judge. And so if you're in Ohio and can vote for him, I highly suggest that you do vote for him. So today's presentation is creating a legally safe fire and EMS department. And I think, again, like I said earlier, it's a sort of a reminder to us as our obligations in our own community and in our fire department to create a legally safe fire department. It's I have to apologize for the parsing as this got uploaded. Some of the letters got moved around, but what this slide essentially talks about is that some of you will be sued. About 30,000 fire departments plus 29,000 EMS departments in America. About 25% of all those organizations are sued for personnel action by your firefighters or your staff. About 10% are for motor vehicle accidents. About 10 to 15% are for rescue events resulting in loss of life or property damage. The rest of us lead a pretty charmed existence. We're not sued. There's no threat of lawsuit from external or internal sources, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't stay vigilant as to what's going on in your organizations. We work in the human condition, right? And people are imperfect. And as we see later, a majority of the lawsuits that we have in our organizations are human caused or people caused. And we can intervene in that directly to prevent that sort of behavior from happening. You as leaders and even as followers set the direction for the department. And then leadership must understand and follow the rules of the road, which come from many, many sources, some internally and some externally, such as the Constitution or state laws, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then leadership is the key to success. But I would say that in order to be a good leader, you have to have good followers. And a lot of that comes in mentoring, hiring, sort of putting up the guardrails for people's behavior in the organization. And it all starts with you. So what are the cornerstones? Leadership and leadership style. You need to be knowledgeable, but you don't have to be, you don't have to know everything. And I always say, try to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you and enjoy a participatory leadership style that people can talk, truth to power, and you're not taking an offense to what they're talking about or what they're telling you, whether that's a compliment or a criticism. But you need to be broad-based, open, and receptive to these sort of input. Take a position. If there's something that's challenging to you, do the research. Don't, be a wishy-washy leader. Creates a lot of confusion amongst the rank and file as to what's the chief's position today. It needs to be solid and it needs to be pretty broad-based. But it needs to focus on what the issue is and try to resolve an issue. Walk the talk. So you need to live your life the way you want other people to live theirs. Set the example. Clear communications. I always say, how many times have we gotten an email or a policy or procedure and your head scratching as to what the heck that actually means? And then I think the truth to power thing is, as a leader, we need to be open to suggestions from rank and file. We want to make sure that you do have good set of policies and procedures in your organizations. I would periodically review your policies, make sure your attorney gets a chance to take a look at it because they need to be defendable. And there's a lot of sources out there. Lexipol has them. Kurt and Brad have a organization that does policies. And so there's a lot of stuff on the market you can obtain. You can use your neighbors. You can have your lawyer write it. You can have, somebody in the organization that does, can write, take a look at what needs to be done policy-wise and create a policy. And so, but I wouldn't create a policy for just the one-day wonder issues. It needs to be a large issue enough to provide a basis and guidance for your firefighters in policy. And then don't tolerate bad behavior because that just leads to more bad behavior. And every time, we work with departments and they basically ignored a complaint or ignored multiple complaints, usually what we're there for is to mitigate the litigation that goes on in your organization. The last is having working SOGs and SOPs. Those are the sort of the squishy guidelines that we must have for operational issues, fire, EMS, operating equipment, those sorts of things. And so your policies are the sort of the black and white component of what your organization is all about. And then the SOGs and SOPs are sort of the working policies that are generally out in the field with fire and EMS and rescue calls and those sorts of things. You want to create best practices, which are basically taken up from good policy and good working conditions in your organizations. You as a leader need to be caring and empathetic towards people. We have a lot of people that have PTS or depression and those sorts of things. We need to have the mental health and behavioral health resources in place in order to manage that. And another class I usually do, it talks about it's just not the events of the of their occupation that puts them into jeopardy, but it's life. And so families, money, kids, wives, husbands, partners, whatever, that's all stressful. Life is stressful, and we just add on to it with material that we pick up while at work. And I think as an organization, we need to make sure that we have a caring and empathetic system in place and make sure we have the adequate resources that we can refer people to that are in jeopardy. We want to provide a mentorship program. I think it's important when you have new employees coming in, you assign them a mentor. You can be a mentor as the fire chief to other officers and firefighters in the organization. Just identify, who those mentors are going to be, how they're tied into what, we expect of new firefighters and existing firefighters also. It also deals with new officers and new upper level management as assistant chiefs and battalion chiefs. We don't know everything as we come in through the door, so we need to have a mentor or somebody to look to for examples and somebody we can go to if we have a question. And then the following is the followership component, and we want to hire good people and our, application, entry level standards, our interviews, our probationary periods, all ensure that we have good people on board, because you can't be a leader if you don't have anybody following you. So it's important that you have, a cadre of individuals that actually follow what you're doing and what your long-term goals are for the organization. And then the little bullet there says help the marginal or troublemakers find a new employment. And again, we don't want to create an environment where a couple of people are spoiling the remainder of the people with bad behavior, bad habits, rumors, innuendos, off-duty conduct. That just creates a rot in the organization. And I think it's incumbent on us as leaders to try to get that out, maybe not pass it on to another department, but just be honest with them that, they're basically not a good fit. I always want to make sure that you document these sort of interchanges well. And if you're going to terminate somebody, you better make sure that you have adequate documentation justifying the fact that you're going to leave or let somebody go, because for sure they're going to come back to sue you for wrongful termination. And you don't want to have to deal with, we don't have any paperwork on him. It was just somebody came to me, one of the officers said, we need to fire this guy. And so, based on their advice, I fired them. Now I'm getting a lawsuit for wrongful termination, and I have no paper to back that up. So make sure documentation is high on the priority of documenting behavior on your bad employees and also your good employees. So that helps a lot when you're coming to promotional times. and getting people up into the ranks of your organization. So it starts with you as leadership, staff makeup and actions. And again, we want to make sure that we're open to counsel, good or bad. So it's the truth to power thing. And then again, when I was an officer in my department, I ensured that I surrounded myself with people that are smarter than me. And I think it worked out for everybody because, when I left the department, people who I worked with moved up into the department. I'm proud to say that one of the members of the department that I retired from, that I hired years ago, became the fire chief and has done an exemplary job for the department. And now he's retiring as well. And then there's a whole cadre of new leadership coming up behind him because, he trained his followers to assume his position in an organization. And leadership is a team activity. I know it's hard to tell what's here on the slide. Again, it's the parsing issue and the coloration. I apologize that for, but we need to take a look at the outside world. We're just not a small container bobbing around in your community. We're part of the community. And so we need to get out and rub elbows with your politicians and your community members and your community clubs. And then, and again, it's your department members are important in your success and the success of the organization. So we want to try to give as much education, how much leadership training, and much responsibility as we can to members of the organization. And the last one, which I don't think you can read, but maybe I can see it here, is that good people leave bad leaders. And so that's sort of the mantra pretty much across public safety, public service, and corporations, that people don't want to work for bad leadership. Or if you just, if they're, have a lot of good suggestions and you just continually ignore them, they're going to move on to some other organization that will take their suggestions and at least work them or listen to them and what they're saying to try to improve their organization. So make sure you listen to individuals. Our 4 areas of concern primarily are the operational, the people areas, the money and recruitment and retention, which we'll all get into here real quick. Our operations, we have basic services, which we all expect to get into, fire and rescue, EMS, those sorts of things. I think we're trying to change, or we're seeing a big change in the number of fires that we're having, and EMS is becoming the predominant factor in most of not all organizations across the United States. And then we have mission creep. And so the fire service is always a can-do type of organization, and then we're asked to do more. And we're asked to do more with less money and less personnel to do that. And I always encourage people that come to my lectures that we can use the word no. It's 2 letters, N-O. We can't do that. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough training. We don't have money. And so we can't do everything for our community. So we need to pick, what we do the best, what we can train to do the best. And if there's other assignments or missions coming down the pike, then let's take those after a careful evaluation of actually if we can do it and we should do it. And so there's some other organizations. I was down in Long Beach, California a few years ago during COVID. The public health department had a difficult time in getting, citizens in their community tested and immunized. And so they came to the fire department, and the fire department says, yeah, we can do that, but we need, X amount of dollars, these number of personnel, these resources. And they put together a pretty well-run program in the city of Long Beach, testing hundreds of people a day, vaccinating equally as many, if not more. And it had a whole operation set up to run a particular high-risk venture during a time of COVID. So we can do it. We just need the resources, and we need the money, and we need the personnel. And they did that mostly in-house organizations, and then got outside resources to come in and lend a pretty significant hand to make the program successful. So we can do it. Our funding is never enough. The do more with less is a bunch of hooey because we can't do more with less. We do less with less. And we're not funded as an essential service. We take a look at where our money is derived from. We always take a second seat to the police, the parks, the potholes. And we need to make sure that we're at the table when budgetary time comes around and then basically have a good case. So we're using a lot more data today as justifies our existence in a community. And we need to use the data for more people, more apparatus, more stations, more training. Yes, we do need to balance the budget. It's all about the fire department, but we do everything emergency wise the police don't do, and we should be funded as an essential service, an essential component of a community. Our people basically is pretty much white males. About 6% are women, about 9% are Hispanics or Latinos, 7% are blacks, and less than 1% are Asian. And so we need to, again, take a look at, what is out in your community and what are we bringing through the front door as to what our fire department looks like. So do we reflect the community or not? And if we don't reflect the community, I think it's incumbent on us to try to get people that are qualified to come in to our organizations, and we need to hire them, because when people look into your organization and all they see is people like me, maybe that's not such a great place for them to be. And I don't probably want to work there because, where's the black man or woman? Where's the Hispanic or Latino man or woman? Where's the Asian men or women? Where are the people that look like me? And so we need to make sure our organization reflects our community. Our people and our workforce is changing with languages and cultural differences, religions, different customs, habits, work ethics. I think we're seeing the newer generation is more, the fire department is a career and a job, but I have a family and a life. So I'm going to balance those two out. So it makes it okay for me as an employee of your department, but it's a little bit different than when I came into the department. We're pretty much single focused. This is our career. And unfortunately, our families are on the sidelines and didn't get our full attention all the time. And I think our workforce is changing quite a bit to reflect that as well. And again, what we're hearing and what we're seeing is there's a different mindset, I think, as it comes to public safety and public service. And as I talked about, is that they're not so much invested in their job as they are in their life. And working for the fire department is a means to an end. And yes, it is a career, and we want to be dedicated to that career, but we have to remember that there is other life out there, and taking a look at valuing the work-life balance a little bit more in diverse interests between their hobbies, their lifestyle, and work in our fire departments. And we're seeing, I don't know why this is, but every time I hired a new firefighter, they go out and buy a new pickup truck. The new generation is more or less focused on possessions and more focused on, I think, lifestyles and life habits. Recruitment and retention, a huge topic. This could be, and I know that the Volunteer Firefighters Association and other organizations doing an immense job in recruiting and retaining firefighters, especially on the volunteer side. And it doesn't seem like we have that much problem on the career side because of the availability now. And I live and work in the Puget Sound area outside of Seattle, and seems like everybody is hiring, over the last several months for a lot of different reasons. There's some money in the budget. We have retirement and turnover, and so positions are popping up everywhere. But if you're in those departments that are volunteers and you're struggling to get people to come in, there's a lot of tools out there in the toolbox that we can use in order to get people coming into our organization. And as you can see, the National Volunteer Fire Council, FEMA, the USFA has a brochure and learning slides. There's a lot of resources out there. iChiefs has it. I mean, every fire department organization has some models and tools to try to help you help yourself in getting people into your own organizations. So let's talk a little bit about essential law and the rules of the road. So the U.S. Constitution obviously is the base for all of our state laws, all of our federal laws, which replicate the Constitution in many, if not all, aspects of it. Our own policies are our laws, and in addition to the SOPs and SOGs, which are the sort of the squishy component of what we do out in the field. And then there's a lot of guideline agencies out there, such as OSHA and NFPA, which we're seeing sort of this blending of of OSHA and NFPA under the new the fire rules in order to bring up what they say is 40 to 50 years of people doing their own, like these two organizations doing their own thing, and now they're going to combine their material together. So we have a more comprehensive document called the Fire Brigade Standard under 29 CFR 1910. And again, it sort of blends those two institutional guidelines and procedures together in order to make what is considered a safer workplace for our firefighters and members of rescue squads and those sorts of things. And EMS is a part of it as well, our tactical rescue people. And so what they're trying to do is take a look at all the stuff that we do and then morph standing policies, procedures, and guidelines from the two organizations into one called the Fire Brigade Standard. And it affects you as a career department, and it doesn't necessarily affect all volunteer departments. But my advice to those organizations is to take a look at it and sort of emulate what they're talking about job descriptions and what's necessary to become a firefighter or a fire officer, a rescueman, EMT, paramedic, that sort of stuff. So try to replicate a lot of that stuff, because the attorneys, when we're defending you for whatever reason, we'll sort of take a look at those standards and see if you're applying them or you're blatantly going against them. That's how one of your firefighters got injured or killed. Or on the discrimination and workplace harassment side, why are people getting harassed and discriminated against in your organization? And so the question is EMS public and private entities affected? Yes, it is. And remember, it's a health and safety standard for all providers, right? And as I said in the last bullet there, it does not apply to volunteer providers because it was felt it was too onerous for a lot of volunteer organizations to comply with. But my advice to the volunteer organizations is to try to take a look at the standards and try to get into those standards with updated policies, procedures, and job descriptions and those sorts of things, because it's a safety issue for your firefighters. So there's a lot of laws protecting fire and EMS personnel, not going through these. But again, the constitutional laws, as you see up there, we have Age Discrimination and Employment Act, the updated Volunteer Firefighter and EMS Personal Job Protection Act, again, is preventing your employer. If you go on an alarm in your community, you're protected against terminations. There's criminal laws out there. There's OSHA and what we just talked about on the previous slide. So there's a lot of laws and policy in place in order to protect you and guarantee your health and safety. All these are on this slide. You can take a look at them. Being that we have more drone pilots out there, we have to comply with the FAA, as we didn't so much before. Now drones are part of our response package now. Building permits and life safety codes, HIPAA, we're all familiar with, only due to the fact that 80% of our calls are for EMS, so we need to protect patient care, patient information. And then again, we take a look at what is available for us if we get and file a lawsuit because we're being discriminated or harassed. And many states have departments of human rights, and they all have state laws against discrimination, which if you need to file a claim, there's a place to go there other than going to the EEOC at the federal government level. And then we want to make sure that we do protect or recognize our protected classes, only because a lot of the discrimination and workplace harassment and hostile environments occur against people that are of, certain races and colors, religious beliefs, national origin, age, sexual identity, pregnancy and childbirth. All the things that you see on here, we get into a jam because we discriminate against them based on their protected status. And so understand what those are and then set up your policy and your in-house conduct to prevent behaviors against individuals based on their protected status in your organizations. Now, a couple of recently enacted laws protecting women is the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which has been around for a long time, but I think they just enhance this to bring recognition of the fact that we do have some of our firefighters who get pregnant, and there's protections in place for them to, take maternity leave. They're covered under light duty. When do they leave? When do they come back? And I always tell my audiences that there's only two people that are involved in making a decision on whether a pregnant firefighter retains at work or goes home for the duration of the pregnancy, and that's the doctor and the firefighter. And there's so many fire chiefs and other organizational members that try to get involved in that decision, and it's none of your business. So I always say, fire chiefs, stay out of those decisions. Just accept what the doc says and what the firefighter says. When they want light duty, they get light duty. If they don't want it, they don't have to have it. So you can't compel somebody to go to a light duty position at any point in their period of pregnancy. And the second one is the Pump Act. Has been around since the ACA was enacted, but we just never recognized it. And we've sent moms that are lactating, who are back to work, who desire to pump on the job, into the hose tower, into the apparatus bay, into a bathroom. And that's not acceptable. And so there's been a couple of cities out there that have learned the hard way after a lawsuit was filed. And so we need to have lactation rooms. We need to have times for your returning firefighters who are lactating to express milk. And then the Fair Labor Standards Act that says a mother is still on the clock while she is expressing milk, so she can't take her off the clock for the 15 or 40 minutes it takes to do that. They're on the clock. And so, and that's what you as an organization need to work out. How's that all going to look on your policies? These should be standing policies already created in your organization, expecting some of your firefighters to get pregnant, and some of them will be lactating when they return to work. So let's get smart about that. Sexual orientation, and again, and this is a June 2020 U.S. Supreme Court decision, that sexual orientation and gender identity is protected as a form of sex discrimination. And again, this has been on the books for a long period of time, and the Supreme Court just brought this up again because of the number of lawsuits that are out there and people who are affected by transitioning, lesbians, gays, firefighters that have been discriminated against and basically terminated from their jobs based on their sexual orientation. And again, laws are in place to protect you and your members, but on the other side, they're also can be used against you as an organization. So in defense of the organization or in defense of your firefighters, the laws are there to protect both of you in times of stress, or if you fail to apply a policy or actually have a policy. We need to make sure that we're well covered, and the laws will take care of us if we obey the laws and pay attention to our own laws, which are our policies. Some personnel issues real quick. The discrimination, harassment, bullying, those sorts of things is one of the most litigated issues in the fire service, and it costs us a lot. And we're in the millions of dollars award range. Some are maybe not so much that high, but any award against your department, especially in times of the budgetary constraints, even though, yes, insurance will pay for it, your insurance premiums go up as a result of it. And so sometimes, and then if, we just may pay out of pocket, and that's happened a number of times as well. So can we afford a $1 or $2 million judgment against your organization? And the answer at any time is no. And again, we tend to sue ourselves with significant awards to the plaintiff. Harassment, discrimination, retaliation is the most frequent. And yeah, we do get sued by the community, but not as often as we do in-house. So discrimination basically is unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people, as we talked about. Who are your protected classes? Recognize what they are and don't discriminate against them, and make sure you have a policy that prohibits that sort of stuff. And then discrimination looks like on a day-to-day basis, and we see those in these three color blocks: is the hiring, promotion assignments, discrimination based on race, gender, the protected classes, and then sometimes there's sort of this under the radar discrimination that takes forms in what's called microaggressions, such as snubs, slights, not included in certain department activities, and those sorts of things. So it has a tendency to invalidate the status of a member of your organization in your organization. Sorry about the parsing again. It's age discrimination. That's what it's supposed to say, but it got sort of distorted there. So anybody 40 years and older are protected, again, under your protected class status. We can decline to hire somebody if it's a business necessity. So they may be too old or they may not have the right qualifications and certifications. And I think we set that standard when we set out our job descriptions and where we're putting applications out there or job wanted to work in the fire service. So make sure that we're not discriminating against anybody in our advertising, but we can set certain limitations in our advertising that sort of limits who can come into your organization. And that's our right under the business necessity, it's called. And then, the other thing, I get a lot of phone calls from older people in the organization say, what if somebody's telling me that I need to leave because I'm too old? And I go, well, that's age discrimination. You need to file a complaint against it. And he goes, well, I don't want to upset the apple cart. I go, well, you have a protected right and you need to protect your rights in order to be, not be discriminated against based on your age. And it's subtle things like, hey, old timer, isn't it time for you to retire? Or, hey, old timer, let me bend over and get that wrench for you. I mean, that's, those sort of little things that which we think may be funny is not all that funny. So we want to make sure you protect your protected individuals in your organization. We do sometimes discriminate against people because of their religious beliefs. And it also protects people that are not a part of the traditional organized religions such as Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, but others who have sincerely held beliefs, ethical or more or morals be attached to a certain belief system. So, it doesn't have to be the standard, the Catholics, the Jewish, the Hindus, it can be people that have other deeply held and convictions. That's their religion. So we need to identify with that as well. And also we need to make some accommodations. So certain clothing, grooming, hair, and facial hair, hours of work. There's not a recent, but maybe a year or two ago, a post office case where they had an individual who practiced his religion on Saturdays, couldn't work on Saturdays. The post office said, you got to work on Saturdays. And so he files a lawsuit against them for religious discrimination. And so the courts came back and said, look, if you can afford to let this guy go, then you should let him go if you have adequate staffing. If it's a business necessity that he stays because you don't have enough personnel, then he stays. And so I think the court kind of kicked the can down the road on that one. But we need to make as much accommodation as we can, especially if somebody, like we said earlier, has a good, deeply held beliefs of a certain religion, and they need, time to practice their religion, right? And then prayer times in the fire station. Certain religions have 5 times a day prayer sessions. Do we allow that? Do we allow certain clothing to be worn? Certain hairstyles to be worn? Facial hair is a big thing. Some religious systems believe in big beards. Probably not possible in the fire service. Other issues, a medical issue dealing with African Americans predominantly, is a skin condition called folliculitis barbae. When they shave, there's little ingrown hairs all underneath their chin, and it makes it difficult, painful. And if they allow a shadow beard or a slight beard to accommodate that, then it may violate the OSHA standard for fit testing. And so, if you take a look at court case in Philadelphia and New York on the East Coast, every month it seems like they're changing back and forth as to yes, you can, no, you can't. And so I think the issue is, what's the best practice and making a reasonable accommodation for some members of your organization that may have this particular medical condition. Disability discrimination, and again, has a disability, have a history or perceived as, and we see a lot of perceptions, especially with dyslexia, which is a reading and learning disorder. And so we need to make a reasonable accommodation for those sorts of things. The individual, again, needs to prove on a dyslexia that they have dyslexia, need to get a note from their physician. We need to make the reasonable accommodation. If somebody has a disability, like an amputated leg, as an example, if you have somebody from the military that got caught up in the explosive blast and lost a limb, can they do the essential elements of the job? That's the key, essential elements of the job. And so if they can climb a ladder, they can crawl, they can do anything a regular firefighter with two ordinary normal legs has, then and you don't have to make a reasonable combination, or even if you do have to make a reasonable combination, they're eligible for hire. Do not discriminate against people because of a limb missing. The other part is we may have a firefighter who's existing in your organization, gets injured on the job, loses a limb, loses an eye, has hearing loss. How do we bring those individuals back on? And do we need to make a reasonable accommodation to bring them in? So a lot of work on our part. We just need to pay attention to the law. And again, ADA reasonable accommodations, you have to have the interactive discussion. You got to get medical records. You got to have a job description with the essential elements of what the job is. We need to consult with the appropriate individuals, including the physician and your attorney. And then again, if you have a collective bargaining unit agreement in place, make sure the union is involved in these sort of discussions to bring injured workers back on board, or even a new hire. So light duty, real allocation of marginal job duties for periods of time. Sometimes we had a person in our organization who had narcolepsy, and we had to make a reasonable accommodation for nap time, certain leaves of absence under the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, modification of job functions, assist devices, therapy animals. And the only therapy animal that is, I think, permissible in the fire service following the FAA designation are dogs. And so that's a whole other conversation about how you bring a therapy animal into your organization. And I think for dogs, which, has its benefits and detractions, I would look to the police. They have canine corps and they deal with dogs all the time. So just ask them how their animals, they're professional dogs. I guess that's kind of stupid to say that, but they're working dogs, and these are therapy dogs. So how do you manage that sort of accommodation in your organization? Harassment. This is one of the big things that we see quite a bit of, especially in these areas, the verbal component, the nonverbal component, the visual, the physical, and the written. Like, people email you or write you letters, can be construed as harassment, especially if it's unrelenting. I always say that in a written, email, you can harass people even when they're off the job, which is illegal. That's called cyber stalking, and it's illegal in every state. And so you can be arrested and terminated from your job based on that. Physical is the unwelcome touching. Sometimes people get into your space. Sometimes you have people that are close talkers, and that's their style, but you can ask them to step back. But sometimes people that are trying to, harass you, get into your bubble, creating a distraction and a disturbance to you. The visual part is pretty, offensive pictures and photos, cartoons, and then nonverbal is people stare at you, they throw kisses, they wink, they do all kinds of crazy stuff. And then the verbal part is pretty explanatory. So it's derogatory comments, racial or sexual epithets, requests for sexual favors, and those sorts of things. So that's harassment in a nutshell. Sexual harassment is harassment that's has sex as the outcome. So it's verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. And then her sexual harassment is considered sexual discrimination. And so we want to avoid that sort of conduct. And we see a lot of the litigation that goes on has a sexual harassment connection to it, especially with your female firefighters. And so they're asked for all kinds of favors under what's called a quid pro quo standard, where it's this for that. So if you want to get promoted, then, we need to trade favors here. And that's totally illegal, and that's, reportable. And you're going to lose a lawsuit on that one. Bullying, usually physical and psychological harassing behavior against an individual. And again, Judge Anthony Scalia, who's passed away, said that unless they're motivated by the victim's membership in a protected class, they don't usually rise to the level of an offense of Title VII, where you're protected against discrimination. So, but bullying, there's campaigns that I think the I-Chiefs have engaged in, the IAFF have engaged in, as anti-bullying policies, which you must have as part of your policy bank. And it's just an unfortunate component of people working together, that some people are bullies and we need to identify them and we need to correct that sort of behavior. Stalking, I talked a little bit about that, but cyber stalking or electronic harassment, pretty much every state has a law against it. It was primarily put into place to protect your children from being harassed, not only at school, but at home. And I know that in our area, we've had several young women commit suicide based on this unrelenting harassment that has gone on their social media and at school. And so lawyers have bootstrapped the stalking, cyber stalking, to protect our members of the organization from this bad behavior. The next one is racial harassment, and that's based targeting an individual based on their race or ethnicity. And then words, deeds, and actions are specific to design the target to feel denigrated, and it's an offense against their particular race or gender. Excuse me. Pranks, pranks and hazing, I think those two can be sort of stuck together as a rite of passage in our organizations. And I think we've probably done that for 100 years because we're trying to bring people on board and, are they the right fit for the organization? And, is it funny? And we think it's funny until it's not funny. And so if you're pranking or hazing a new person in your organization, they tell you to stop, then you need to stop, right? Because then it becomes bullying, becomes discriminatory, becomes harassing. And those are all chargeable offenses and reportable offenses. Even if you have somebody who's been in your organization for a long period of time, it's this sort of unrelenting hazing or pranks that go on over a long period of time. It may be funny for a while, but we always say it is funny until it's not. And when it's not, you need to stop. And so just a word to the wise. And then religious harassment, based on their religious beliefs, as we talked about before, we have a tendency to target people who believe differently than we do. And so, again, those are protected classes, and we need to remind ourselves that any sort of religious harassment is illegal. And again, in your organization is chargeable, and you can get sued for it. So be aware. Remember, your policies are your laws. So your essential policies should include your people, against discrimination, against harassment, hazing, bullying, retaliation. They should mirror the state and federal laws to protect your people. And most of your state laws are based on federal standards. And so there's a compatibility there between the two. And you can file a lawsuit either at the EEOC or with your state's Human Rights Commission. And they have a tendency to populate themselves, so they're not, doubling up. But if you have a Department of Justice knock on your door for a harassment case, you got something that's significant, and somebody didn't follow policy or somebody didn't follow through on a complaint. And so the next step for these people that feel that they have no recourse is that they they'll file a lawsuit outside. And make sure that you have appearance and code of conduct, code of ethics as well. The code of conduct, you can terminate somebody under the code of conduct because, as I say, you can't make up policies for every possible thing that may happen in or out of your department. And so a code of conduct is sort of that sort of base standard allowing you to take action against those individuals and possibly terminate them based on how egregious the conduct is. But remember, you have to go through a due process that your members have a right of representation. They have a hearing. They have the evidence presented against them. They have an opportunity to defend themselves. So it's like a mini courtroom in your fire station, trying to make sure that we do everything right and avoid any sort of litigation that may go on. But sometimes people do such egregious things both in and out of your organization that termination is the only only recourse. Make sure you have policies on drug and alcohol, especially are they impaired, which is a whole process. A lot of times people that have collective bargaining agreements will have that sort of impairment standard in there, and what the policy is for that. Hiring, make sure you have a hiring policy. How do you have one? That's the first question. And then, are you applying your hiring policies, your promotion policies, equitably across the board? A good case to look at is Ricci versus DiStefano in New Haven, Connecticut. Probably about 10 years ago, a Supreme Court decision ruled on a reverse discrimination case, and Frank can tell you all about it because he was the principal in this particular lawsuit, which was very interesting to start with and has had ramifications even to today in other departments. So, and then you have a social media policy. I can't tell you how many firefighters and EMTs and others have been terminated based on dumb statements and bad material in your social media sites. And so you do have a right of First Amendment. Again, our newly or our judge, I'll call him judge now because I expect him to win. Comstock will tell you, because he's a First Amendment adherent, and he'll tell you all about your rights under the First Amendment. And we have protected rights in the fire service or public safety, but they're not universal, right? So we can do crazy stuff on our social media platforms if you're not part of the public service package. But even what you put on your Facebook off the job may have a nexus back to your job. And so you can get disciplined and possibly terminated as a result of dumb things that we put on our social media sites. Policies versus SOGs. Real quickly, standard operating procedures or guidelines are more flexible. Some departments use best practices. We can bring a policy to court because that's your law, but it's very difficult to bring SOG and SOP to court because they're like squishy. And they're not policy. So a lot of SOG, SOPs we see on emergency responses because not everyone's the same. So we have to maybe do things differently on every call. But again, we want to make sure we have two separate documents, policies and SOP, SOGs, in order to distinguish what our laws are in-house and then what our operating practices are outside. Codes of ethics and conducts. Again, as I talked about earlier, it's basically a set of principles of conduct within the organization that guide decision-making behavior, clarifies your organization's mission and values, which I think is important to everybody because to get to know where we're going and how we're going to get there. And then we can discipline with, as I said earlier, with violations of code of conduct or ethics under a term called conduct unbecoming. And that's either in-house or outside the department where they really don't have a policy that addresses that sort of egregious behavior that embarrasses the department and the organization and your community. Off-duty conduct. Sorry again about the parsing. It's firefighters versus cops in a bar and off-duty in a fight. California police officer making pornographic videos in a police uniform, selling drugs, download kiddie porn as a crime right out of the chute and subject to immediate termination and going to the jail. Domestic violence. I have a funny story about that, but maybe when I see you in a conference, I can tell you about it. But domestic violence is a reportable crime. And again, it may affect your employment status at work. And then we've had events of firefighters running prostitution rings out of the fire station. So, and off duty as well. So be careful, be careful, be careful. The slide, indicates that we want to listen to your people. So pay attention to what goes on in your organization. Don't be a spectator. Things don't get better by themselves. We got to take, sometimes strong action in order to correct the way that your ship is going. And so don't be a spectator. Somebody comes up to you and says, hey, or an officer comes to you, or you're hearing scuttlebutt in the fire stations. You want to pay attention to that sort of stuff and just don't blow it off to, that's just what goes on here. Well, that is what goes on there. It's going on everywhere. So if you hear it over here, it's going on over there. So listen to what people are telling you and you'll be better off for it. right? Effects of unresolved complaints. People don't want to come to work. It may be a hostile environment. Why would I want to work in there? The morale declines, work doesn't get done, and then problems with personnel lives, dealing with maybe family. People bring their family issues to work or their work issues home to their family. And so we need to have an avenue in order to help mitigate those with either an EAP program or a peer support group or member in the organization. Make sure we have channels for people to go to help themselves, become a better employee and actually want to show up tomorrow for work. Penalties for not responding to a complaint is litigation, and all the little things you see there is lost wages, reinstatement, emotional distress, punitive damages, lots of attorneys' fees, lost time, poor morale, bad publicity, because it always gets out in the press. And I always tell my audience is that bad press sells newspapers, right? We see good things most of the time because our PIOs in the department are pushing out good stuff to the organization or from the organization to the media. The bad stuff is, the fire department is undergoing a sexual harassment suit. The firefighter, blah, blah, was arrested for drunk driving or domestic violence or, crimes, robberies or murders or whatever, that sort of stuff. All that stuff makes newspapers sell like crazy. And so I'd rather be on the good side, let your PIO do your job for you, than on the bad side where bad behavior in the organization spills out into the streets and we just fail to take care of it. We want to also prevent retaliation. Like a lot of times we'll see people who will file complaints internally get retaliated against. And you can see some of the examples below there: relocation, altering work hours, unnecessarily psychological fit for duty evaluations, hostile conduct from an officer, poor job evaluations. And I can tell you that, unnecessary psychological or fit for duty evaluations don't turn out the way that you expect. My wife is a psychologist who's had some requests from fire departments and police departments on fit for duty because the firefighter or the police officer is in trouble a lot or may have what's classified by the chief as psychological problems. And so my wife goes, well, what are you looking for? Because they're looking to terminate the employee, but how do you get there through the psychological exam? And you'd be better off on doing repetitive documentation on bad behavior. And maybe, yes, the firefighter or police officer does have some sort of an issue like PTSD or depression, which is causing a behavioral change. And if that is the outcome, then you need to be able to deal with it internally. And again, that's a reasonable combination that you must make. And it may just turn this whole picture around as you think you have a bad employee, is you have an employee in jeopardy. And so it's our obligation to make sure that we fix that internally and have the mechanism in place to do so. Leadership responsibilities, again, understand the federal and state laws against discrimination, understand how your policies that are well written can reinforce the existing law, prepare the department for changing culture of their department, because the influx of new firefighters coming in with a new attitude, a new perspective, a new mission, I guess, for themselves and their families to participate not only in the department, but in their community, but more importantly, so back onto their own lives. And we need to be open communicators, right? So emails, memos, personal conversation, get out of your office, walk around your own, department, get in your car, drive to the other stations, go out and visit, be visible to people and talk to people because they want to talk to you. And make sure you have an open line of communication as well. And then employer preventative action, again, is have appropriate policies, educate from the top to the bottom, monitor behavior, and then make sure that you have an adequate and accessible confidential complaint procedure that's in place that people can file a complaint and it doesn't get, all over the department. Although I always say that if you're the aggrieved, sometimes you're the worst offender about putting out information in the form of the fire department's trying to screw me over by disciplining me, and then everybody gets to know about it. So sometimes the complainer becomes their own worst enemy by not keeping, kind of the lid on the pot and not spread it all over the place. Just make sure it doesn't come out of your office. Everybody's responsibility, again, and these are for rank and file. The firefighters have an important role in this as well. And then address issues, confront the bully, stop the bad behavior. You can do a lot just by saying stop or no, or this is impermissible, or this is illegal. And so we want to make sure that, from the top to the bottom of your organization, people are attuned and aware of what goes on. Create a zero tolerance policy for bullying, and bullying can, damage the morale of your organization pretty quickly. It says, a toxic workplace won't fix itself, and you as the leader and your leaders need to do something about it. And don't be afraid to step into the fray, because that's your job. And if you can't do your job, then we'll need to find somebody else that can do your job for you. And again, it's up to leadership to take action. And then stop the problem early, and then save your talent, because a lot of people who are in these sort of harassing and discriminatory environments leave the organization. They'll go somewhere else. They'll take their talents, their skills to another department, and that's your loss. And I think you have a lot to do with preventing that loss. And then again, when your best people leave, you don't know why. And I've asked in other classes how many people actually do exit interviews, and a very few hands raise. And so how do you know what the problem is, if there is a problem in your department? And why are sometimes some of your best people leaving if you don't ask them? Why are you leaving? What could we have done better to keep you here? What can we do now to keep you here? I mean, you got to take a lot of intervening steps. And again, as the leader, or if you're in a leadership position, again, that's your obligation and responsibility to your organization and to your membership as well. Best practices, again, is leadership commitment, transparent communications, equitable employment practices, recruiting, in your community, continuous learning. So we want to make sure that we have adequate money in our training budget, or we do in-house training, coaching and mentoring, early conflict resolution, and a flexible work culture, because people have lives, and unfortunately they're in crisis sometimes. So let's make our workplace as flexible as possible to accommodate their lifestyle as well. And then how do we measure success in our goal of a legally safe workplace? And it's, again, fewer grievances and complaints and lawsuits, improved labor relationships. If you're in a right to work state, which there are several, get a committee between labor and management to talk about the issues and nip the problems in the bud. Reduce hate incidents. And there's a number of those we see in our fire journals or periodicals where, and I'll just say there's a case in Miami where 6 members of the Miami department hung a noose over a black firefighter's picture and drew horrible pictures of stuff on their family portraits that are in his office. And those guys there was a police investigation. Those guys got fired, but that's a hate crime, right? So we want to not have that occur in your department. People want to work in your department. You hired them on for a specific purpose. They bring in special talents or certain skills, and you want to keep them on board. And then again, make sure that you up your game on recruitment and retention to keep people in your organization and to bring people in your organization that want to be there. So policy is not enough. So apply the policies. And again, illusion of following the law regulations is not enough. You want to walk the talk. You want to value and encourage people in your organization to be a member and participatory member of your organization. Listen to everybody. Everybody's got some good things to say or good ideas to work on. Intervene early in bad behavior. And then again, actions and not mere words are the key to a successfully operating fire department. Well, thank you. If you have any comments or questions or whatever, my contact information is here. You can contact any of the attorneys that I listed on the first slide, Kurt, Chip, and Brad. Always willing to help out with a phone call. I never charge for phone calls. They don't charge for phone calls. But I always say if we actually have to practice the law, then get ready to pay. So without further ado, be safe out there. Thank you for doing what you do. And then we'll see you soon at our next podcast. And certainly we will see many of you in April at FDIC, and I'm looking forward to that event as well.